Hello, everybody. I was getting some requests from people who wanted to know how I did my Mario quilt. So I decided to make a video. And at first, when people were like, I want to know your technique, I was like, technique? I don't really have a technique. But then I thought, well, I did kind of have a way that I did it, so I thought I would show you guys. I hope you like this video that I put together. So how I started was with a cross-stitch pattern that I bought off of Etsy. And with the previous quilt that I had made, each pixel was a ½ inch. And I looked at this pattern and I calculated that if each pixel was a ½ inch, it would be way too big. So I decided that each pixel was going to be a centimeter. So I calculated that if each pixel was a centimeter, it was still going to be pretty big. It was going to be almost a queen size, but I decided that that would be fine because I really wanted to do it. Another thing I noticed when I looked at this pattern is that this was not the color scheme of the original Super Mario Bros. 3 for NES. I believe this is the color scheme for the reintroduction on Super Nintendo, so I wanted it to be a little bit more true to the NES version, and I used this screenshot you see here as a reference. Okay, so here's a close-up look of the pattern. So I decided if 1 pixel is a centimeter, I was going to give myself a centimeter seam allowance, which I know seems like a lot, but it just seemed the easiest way to measure. So that means that if I was cutting 1 pixel, it would be 3 centimeters by 3 centimeters square. So I figured out which line on my sewing machine would give me a 1 centimeter seam allowance right there. Okay, so now that I've decided the size and I know my seam allowance, I have to decide like where am I going to start. So I decided to start with the cactus bushes because there were the most of them. Oh my goodness, you guys, there are 47 of them. And I'm not necessarily going to sew individual single pixels for every single one because that's not necessary. So what I decided to do was to look at each of these sort of characters on the map and see how large of a section can I get away with. So as you see here, I drew a picture of the cactus and I kind of scribbled over it to figure out like how large can I make each section where there are similar colors, and then what areas can I sew together. So I've kind of drawn lines to show where I'm planning on which sections I'm going to sew together. Okay, so basically how I did it. So I look at, okay, so I'm going to sew all these pieces together, and then I'm going to sew all those pieces together, and then I'm going to sew that section together as a block. Then if each of these is a centimeter, I would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 centimeters, and then a centimeter on each side for the seam allowance. So that would be 8 this way, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 centimeters plus 2 centimeters, so 6 this way. So then this is a 6 by 8 square. So that's how I calculated the size of all the different pieces. And no matter how much you calculate, it always seems to be a little wonky, but it turned out pretty good. Now, once I had a plan for the cactus, I have to cut the pieces. And I cut all the pieces for all 47 cacti at once. And that was a lot of pieces. So here you can see where I've like calculated how many pieces that I need of each color. It was actually really hard to keep track of. So I had little Ziploc bags for each color and size so that I could keep track of them as I was sewing them. And you guys, it took me a month just to sew the 47 cacti. Once I completed the cacti, I started working on characters where there was only one of each. This was really arbitrary. I was just kind of picking. So with each character, I would go and redraw it on graph paper so that I could plan out which sections I wanted to sew first. So you can see here all my examples. And also here, real quick, is a picture of my calculating how many pieces I needed for the cacti, because that was like so much. Another challenge that I had was once I had sewn a good amount of these major characters, I started to realize that the color that I had picked for the background, I didn't quite have enough of, and I had gone to Ben Franklin and bought fabric there because they have so many amazing fabrics, but then I realized the fabric was kind of expensive, and I went back to find more of the fabric, and I got it kind of on sale, I guess, and it was discontinued. and there wasn't any more of it. So the way I ended up doing the background was kind of out of necessity because I didn't have enough of one color, so I had to start incorporating other colors. So I did all the characters before the background to make sure that I had all the characters sort of surrounded by the same color because I was worried that I wouldn't have enough. So you can see here I incorporated similar colors, but they're not exactly the same. So the patchwork in the background I actually decided to do because I ran out of that color. Alright, so let's talk about cutting pieces. I'm going to show you my little cutting setup here. So this is a great thing that I got at Walmart. One side is for cutting pieces, the other side is for ironing. I have a T-square here to make sure that I can cut things accurately. I buy a lot of fat quarters. So what I would do is I would take the fat quarter, iron it, fold it over, iron it, fold it over again. So every piece of fabric I got, I would fold it over into these sort of like quarters like this. That way I could lay the strip of fabric and line it up so that I could cut it into strips that are either, 3 centimeters or 4 centimeters or whatever size that I needed. And then I can just line my T-square up with the size that I needed and then cut it right along the T-square. So that made it pretty easy for me. Once you've cut that, you have a strip the length of the quarter, and then you can cut that into squares or rectangles. So here's a little picture of my cutting setup, my little craft table. That was a picture of it when it's clean. Here's a picture of me actually using it when it's a complete disaster. This is a picture of my sewing setup. I actually like to sew standing up because I have a back injury and sitting for a long time can be very painful. Here's me using my sewing setup. My sister surprised me. I was listening to my textbook for school and sewing, and she came up behind me, and I didn't know she was taking that picture, so that's kind of embarrassing. Also, there are a few things that were missing from the pattern that I thought that I needed to add. So if you look at the screenshot here, we have the little help bubble that wasn't there, the Mario on the start, and also the little Hammer Bros that I decided to draw out so that I could add them because I really felt like those needed to be on there. So here you can see where I've plotted out where the Hammer Bros guy goes and where the help bubble goes. And also you see where I've drawn the squares where I've decided what size I'm going to do the patchwork for the background. Okay, so now once I've made all the major components, it was time to start putting it together. How I did this was I basically started by sewing together the groups of cacti. So I looked at how they were grouped together and I sewed them together. And then there wasn't much else to do. So you have the cacti, and then we have the components that I had already made, so like the number blocks and the Mario, and then I just had to fill in the blank with the patchwork background and the little lines. So this part started to go pretty fast, which was really exciting, and the quilt started coming together. The last large component on the pattern that I hadn't completed was the river, which was a little bit complex, so I redrew it on the graph paper so that I could really look at what are the largest pieces I could cut out to make it work, and I had some really cool blue fabric that I was excited to use for this. So here's some examples of how I drew that out on the paper and sort of plotted out how I was going to cut those pieces. Now, at this point, it really felt good because it was like, okay, basically, we got it done. But it wasn't done because, first of all, it wasn't the right shape for a queen quilt. But secondly, I really wanted to do that bottom score area that wasn't in the pattern. So I had to make my own pattern for that. Basically, I just looked very closely at this screenshot and drew it out on graph paper. And it was pretty close. It wasn't exact, but it was close enough that this is the end result that I got. And I'm very happy with it. So it basically so far has taken me 2 months and a week. And this is just the top. Obviously, I have to do the back and I'm going to hand quilt it. So that's going to take a long time. So I'm definitely not done. But I cannot believe how much detail and how long this took. And there are definitely parts that are crooked and messed up, but when you step back, it looks pretty dang good. It was so much fun to make. And when I bought these patterns on Etsy, they had them for all the worlds. So I think I'm going to be making more. Who knows? Maybe I'll make more videos. So if you stayed through this whole video to watch it, thank you. Maybe leave a comment, and if you have any questions, I will answer them. Thanks for watching.